This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. All right, you've heard the phrase, walk the talk. Now it's time to talk the walk with Dana Wasson. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
So you are an employee, not employee engagement, but specifically employee experience expert, among other things. Give us a quick sketch of your professional journey that brought you to this work, and then let's talk about what is employee experience.
1 second. Okay, Misty, thank you. This is her favorite thing to do to me in these things.
The squeaky toy. Very nice.
Yes, that's how she participates. My professional journey, thank you for asking. So I started off in the training arena. So I was training a lot of leaders in companies who had never had any formal leadership training. They'd just been kind of doing it by the seat of their pants. Eventually, in working with enough of those leaders, started doing more of the strategic leadership things that companies need to do. So strategic planning, visioning, working with their teams, and really loved that kind of work. But I saw that there was a gap after doing it for a long time, which was the leaders would get together and have these great conversations where they could debate and converse and exchange ideas, and then out of it come up with some really great strategies. But they didn't have a way to transfer that conversation out to the employees who are actually going to have to make that happen. And I was getting more concerned because it felt like they were just taking a plan and throwing it over a brick wall and expecting somebody to catch it and run with it. And without the context around it, it became really difficult to do those plans. So without the context for those conversations, it was really hard to know the why behind the what. And so there was kind of this disconnect and kind of a lack of engagement. And so my first parlay into the engagement world was looking at how to create a bridge between the leaders who had the conversations and the managers and the employees who are going to have to implement those plans. And so I became really involved in using my graphic skills, creating some templates and a process around how to involve them in the conversation around why, and having the leaders give some context without dominating the conversation, because there was no value in not allowing the employees to ask the questions about why. And what was great about it, David, is when they had those conversations, there was so much more excitement and enthusiasm about carrying off the plans because they felt like they were part of the process rather than just being handed a folder and kind of saying go. So I loved doing that work, and I did that work for quite a while and still do that work. And then kind of mid-2000s, there was this kind of resurgence of this idea of employee engagement surveys. So for a long, long time, companies did what was called a satisfaction survey. So they sent it out to their employees. How satisfied are you with work, your job, your boss, whatever? And HR was kind of responsible for that whole process, soup to nuts. So when there began to be more research about employee happiness, more about valuing the employee's part in the organization, these employee engagement surveys took off. And so Gallup and McKinsey and a lot of other big companies created these great surveys. And it was wonderful, great concept in theory, but there were some significant problems with it. One, often there was a huge amount of effort and resource that was involved in implementing the survey to begin with. So say you have an employee population of, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people. You don't just run the survey and then get the results right back. So you run the survey in March and you get the results back in September. Well, that's a lifetime in some companies and for some employees. And so sometimes by the time you got the results, whatever it was that was either making people really happy or more likely making them really frustrated and disengaged, it wasn't relevant anymore. And more importantly, I think that there was a disconnect between the connection of the leader having the actual conversation with employees about what was happening. And so when you create that distance, there's a lack of trust and a lack of ability to have the conversations that need to happen between leaders, particularly leaders and their own teams. And there's an expression that says, people join companies. So I might join Google because it sounds like a great company. But if I have a real jerk of a boss, I'm going to leave because of that jerk of the boss, even though I love the company. And so employee engagement became much more, instead of an HR policy, it became a leadership policy in the really effective companies, because they understood it was the leader who had the greatest influence over the experience of the employees. But again, going back to the surveys, and the reason that I'm not a really big fan of surveys is the survey created that disconnect, and the leader didn't have the skill to be able to have either the initial conversation, but even the follow-up conversation. So a lot of times in some companies, because they got really attached to numbers, they wanted to measure them on numbers. Oh, your percentage is this. You need to bring it up to this. Well, it's not about numbers. It's about people. So it's really about how do you, again, create that bridge between employees and leaders to be able to have that conversation. And so I see myself as a conduit to help them learn those skills and hopefully work myself out of a job, because I want them the next round to be able to have the conversation directly themselves instead of needing somebody from the outside. Long-winded answer.
Yeah, but it's a great answer. But let me ask you from a sales perspective, this is almost like selling how not to be a jerk training, meaning that a leader, an executive might come to you and say, Dana, we have a terrible culture. We have terrible employee engagement. We got to fix these people. We got to put some things in place. We got to get them on board. And of course, what you can't say, or maybe you can, is, well, have a pretty good clue that the problem is sitting in your chair right now. But are leaders self-aware enough to reach out for help, or do you sometimes have to, put a little bit of sugar in the medicine and deal with both problems at the same time once you're brought in?
Yes. Well, that's a great question. So a lot of times it is the very senior leaders who see that there's a problem below them. Although oftentimes the culture starts at the top, right? So the senior leader, but we have to start somewhere. So we start with hopefully a whole organization, but sometimes just a team. And funny enough, the way that I got into the engagement space was actually at Mars. They had actually overheard a mid-manager say, these employees are not engageable. And my internal colleague who contacted me at the time said she was so furious at hearing that. It's basically like a leader saying, I give up on these people. If you give me a new slew of people, a new team, I guarantee we'll have a win. Well, that's, to write off a whole group of people is saying something about the way that you're running your team or your organization. And so that's how we got started. And we created a process that was very, not initially, but through lots of trial and error and experimentation, was very methodical in allowing the employees to talk directly to us, to tell us what was going on in some of the key areas that people find are the way that people are disengaged. So, for example, communication can be a really great way to either engage or more likely disengage people. If people don't communicate or communicate in poor ways. Another way is recognition. If the recognition program either doesn't exist or it rewards the wrong behaviors, that can create either disengagement or engagement. So we have these 6 key areas that we look at, we talk to employees about. But before we do any of that, back to your question, we talk with the leaders of the organization and say, look, this is what the program is, what it looks like. This is what the outcomes you can expect. But here's what we need from you. We need your commitment that you're going to be open to being willing to accept feedback. Some of it might be more painful than others, but being part of the solution. And we'll hold your hand the entire way to be able to have those great conversations with your employees. And honestly, if people say that they can't sign up for that, then we don't do it because it's too much, where they say if you open a cut, you have to be willing to accept the wound. Well, this is like major surgery. And if we don't have somebody who's really committed to like being along for the physical therapy and all of the things that come afterwards, then there's no point in opening up the body, right? So, but it really can be such a game changer. And what was great, going back to numbers and the number focus that a lot of companies have, is when they do the process, they do find that the numbers, the next round of engagement surveys that they do increase. like by a significant percentage. So it statistically, if you were going to go measuring by the numbers, it does show the results with the commitment to the process.
Hey, good looking. Are you currently getting paid to speak? Would you like to ramp that up? We can help. Book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team at doitmarketing.com/call, and let's see what we might do together. The call is free, but the results may be priceless. Let me ask you a coronavirus question, because as we're recording this, we are in the middle of this crazy COVID-19 coronavirus crisis, health crisis, global tragedy, all kinds of things being turned upside down and inside out. Do you feel, I think I know the answer, but let's ask anyway, do you feel that this particular topic of employee experience is needed now more than ever, critical now more than ever, and in some cases with some companies might mean the difference between survival and profitability versus going extinct?
I do, David, actually. I think it's very interesting. I've been listening to the news and looking at the US approach to how we handled unemployment, job loss, et cetera, versus Europe. So, for example, what Europe did is they decided it was really important to keep employees on the payroll. So both the company survived, and there wasn't this sort of mad scramble afterwards to have to rehire people. We decided to do it the other way. So we went, as America does, we go to the individual rather than to the corporation. And we will see at the end of this whether that was the right or wrong decision. Because, you have now a whole bunch of people who are in the pond of future employees. And if they had a bad experience at the employer that they were previously working at, are they likely to go back there, or are they going to use that kind of open enrollment time, if you will, to look for a better, more satisfying job? I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. I remember when we were doing this process initially, it was actually around the time of the, I don't know, what do we call it? The Great Depression, 2008, 2009.
Right.
I'm not even kidding. There were leaders who would say to employees, because they felt like they had the upper hand, they said, if you don't like it here, you can leave. There's the door. And I remember going in leadership sessions and coaching them and saying, it's not always going to be like this. And when it turns around, and it will, and it's an employee-centered kind of buyer's market, they are going to have the choice, especially the good ones, the ones that you want to keep. They're going to have the choice to go somewhere else. And trust me, they will remember what you said to them or their colleagues. And they'll find a different job, a better job, somewhere where they feel more appreciated.
For sure. Well, let me ask you, just in both good times and bad, upside down and right side up, the other aspect or the other discipline that you bring to your work is design thinking. And tell us a little bit, for people that have not heard that term, they've been hiding under a rock perhaps. What is design thinking, and how do you integrate that into your work around employee experience?
So design thinking is something that came out of the Stanford Design School, or Stanford D School. And it's actually been around a very, very long time. It's about how do we look through the customer's lens to think about what their needs and wants are. So, for example, I remember years ago, I was consulting with a diabetes meter maker, right? And they were talking with, at that point in time, they were talking with parents of type 1 diabetes kids. So these are kids who have diabetes from a very, very young age. And they were talking about their whole journey, their journey through, very young children all the way through preteen to teen to adulthood, and the challenges they have. And they were paying a lot of attention to where their pain points were so that they could work out how to make their product meet those pain points and be able to help them have a better experience. So flip it into the employee experience. The central core tenet of design thinking is about empathy. So how do you put yourself into another person's shoes and understand what their experience is like? So if you look at an employee, the employee experience life cycle starts in a company from the very first touch point that a potential employee has with the company, right? So it's the hiring cycle. So plenty of times people will fill out job applications, never hear back from a company. I mean, that's a terrible experience, right? If you've ever been, I remember my husband in a job search, and he would send out applications and wouldn't hear from probably 80 to 90% of these companies. So you can imagine there's like a very early bright spot you could stand out if you just get back to people. So one of the companies I highlight in my book is Zappos, and they actually go all the way as far as to give coaching to people who aren't selected, to tell them what they could have done better in their interview. There's no value to them in actually doing that. I mean, they don't have to spend that kind of time and money to do that kind of feedback, but they feel like it's a part of the employee experience. And you can bet those people are, one, probably more likely to tell their friends what a great company this is, even though they didn't get the job. And they're probably likely to apply again in the future. So great experience. And then that goes all the way through. What kind of onboarding experience do you have? And then going back to those key points about recognition, communication, leadership, what are the things that are really happening well in your company? And how do you talk to employees to find out where are the pain points, if you will? Where are the things that are falling down that could easily be fixed sometimes?
Really, really good. Let me ask you also, we'll go behind the scenes a little bit because we always like to tap into your expertise and also how you like to market and monetize that expertise. Let's say I'm a CEO. I'm listening. I'm saying, man, Dana's singing my song. She is ringing my number. This is exactly what we're up against. This is exactly what we need to work on. What are the different distribution methods or the different delivery modes? Is there speaking? Is there executive coaching and mentoring? Is there full-blown consulting projects? How do you deliver this?
So I'm delivering it in a couple of different ways. I'm doing speaking. So I'm hopefully educating senior leaders, mid-level managers, even employees about what this thing called employee experience is and why they're not getting the results that they want out of their employee engagement surveys, and how there really is a better way. And this concept of design thinking and involving people in the conversation, helping them understand how they can use those tools to have a better workplace. So that's at one end of the spectrum. That's kind of the entry level door. At the other end, the idea of full-blown consulting. So going in, doing an assessment, having that conversation with leaders about what their role is going to be and what the outcome is going to look like and what their follow-up at the other end is going to be. And I love doing those projects. They can be big projects. They can be smaller projects. I've done them as small as just one team within an organization. So for example, a sales team or an HR team, to have them start to form that more productive conversation and actually working through to action planning, all the way to a whole entire organization where you're talking to 500 or 600 people and bringing together a smaller group to suss out what are the really big issues as opposed to a lot of noise, but what are actually the things that are standing out, the signals that we need to be paying attention to, and then starting to put some plans into place for how to address them.
Now, besides your fantastic book, which we'll talk about and link up in the show notes, right under this episode, when people go to thespeakingshow.com, that's where you grab your copy of Talk the Walk, and we'll also point out your website and all kinds of other cool things. Besides your book, how do executives find you? How do clients find you? How do you find them? What is your lead generating procedure, generally speaking, where someone might raise their hand and say, hey, Dana, like I said, you're singing my song. We need your help. Do they find you through the book? Do they find you through referrals? Do you reach out? What's your reach out strategy? Give us an idea of what that front door looks like.
Yes, to all the things you just mentioned. So it's getting the book, and I've been really pleased to have people get the book, refer it to others. A lot of times people are asking for me to include it as part of any other consulting I'm doing. So if I'm doing team consulting or business strategy, people want to have the book. They love getting a signed copy of a book. A lot of it's referrals. So people who have worked with me in the past and have since maybe moved to a different company, not hopefully because they were disengaged, they will reach back to me and say, hey, remember that project we did at X company? I'd like to do it here. That's been really fun because I feel like I have a connection point to that person, but here's a whole new system that we get to see what's going on, kind of look under the hood. And then I'm doing email newsletters to people, just talking about things that are related to employee experience. So for me, that's about leadership points, it's about culture, and it's about learning. Like, how do you just make sure that people are continuously learning? Because that is a really easy way, both in encouraging and allowing employees to do that. They learn more about things that are important to them.
What a great episode. Wowza. Tell you what, if you want to ramp up your revenue as an expert who speaks professionally, you should really check out our free online training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. Let me ask you, as we're wrapping up here, a lot of experts and a lot of consultants are looking at the current landscape, which is totally crazy, upside down, emergency mode, and they're looking at a pivot or a flex in their messaging, in their marketing, in the frame around their content to make it more urgent and more relevant to the current craziness. Are there some pivots or flexes that you're finding particularly effective in either adapting your message, adapting your approach, adapting your outcomes that you talk to leaders about?
I think the adapt and flex is thinking about different ways. Well, I mean, all of us, right, are figuring out different ways to communicate. And we're finding things like this, like a Zoom call can be a good way to send a message. Right now, it's a necessary way to send a message, but how do you incorporate other things like visuals, or how do you call out people to be participative? So setting, a little more structure when you have to work virtually like we are.
Well, so that's how you're pivoting your delivery model.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, when it comes to employee experience, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to designing a world-class workplace, have you pivoted the message around the value or the outcome of that?
I haven't specifically, but I think the message really is, how do you flex and care for your employees in a crisis? So, for example, crisis either brings out the very best of us or the very worst of us. For example, I have a colleague who works remotely always, but her headquarters is in Virginia. So her boss, even though this whole coronavirus was going on and things were, kind of up in flux and nobody was sure when we were going to be able to be moving, her boss had said, well, we still want you to fly back to Virginia to be here for an audit. And I know what she was feeling, which was, I feel like my boss doesn't care about me as a person, to put me in danger for something that's not really, really necessary. I think that's the pivot that people need to be looking at. I think that leaders need to be looking at how they are caring for their employees in these times. People are under so much stress to take care of not only their job in a remote, sort of very difficult way to work for many people, but they're caring for kids, or they're worried about their older relatives, all sorts of other things that are, kind of floating around as thought bubbles around their head. And how that leader responds to those people is really telling about who they are at the core as a leader. And I think that's the big message. I've had a blog post I'm working on, which is about leadership in crisis and how, what good responses look like versus bad responses. Right. And how you keep people feeling safe and how you keep them feeling cared for when you can't actually see them, when you're expecting them to do things that they've never had to do before.
Bonus question. What is your superpower?
My superpower is being a good listener and having people really feel that and feel like they can trust me and talk to me.
So you have the Oprah effect or the Barbara Walters effect.
Ooh, that's very nice. I would love to
just open up to you because you're such a fantastic, engaged, active listener that they just want to pour their hearts out to you.
Yes, sure.
I love it.
I do too.
Well, so two final questions here as we wrap up. The final question is, what resources and goodies and links do we want to share with people? But before we get to that, if folks were to take one central idea from our conversation today about employee experience, leadership, how to build a culture of engagement and performance, what do you hope that one central message might be?
Talk to people. Be willing to listen, even to hard things. Don't take it personally. My friend and colleague Tom says, don't take it personally. It's not about you. And I really, really believe that. I think that when people are willing to share what's frustrating, it means that they trust you enough to feel like they can do that. And the more scary idea is that people aren't willing to share, because it means that there are losses brewing underneath the surface that they don't feel safe to be able to say. So my big message is really, really work at communicating you care about people, and that will come back to you tenfold.
Talk to your humans and talk
To
the
your human.
walk.
Yes.
Talk the walk. So where can we send people if they want to connect with more Dana Wasson brilliance? How do people get connected and stay connected? What resources can we link them up with?
You can link them up to my website, which is take-action.com, or they can go to the book website, which is talk-the-walk.biz. I do a newsletter for people who sign up for email, so I'm happy to link anybody up who wants to do that. And I'm on Twitter, but not very well. So I think I'm at Take Action or something like that. Anyway.
Are you on LinkedIn, and how well?
Yes. And that's where I publish any articles that I write. So I put them up there.
Fantastic. So book, website, LinkedIn, all the goodies are there. You have a fantastic blog. You have an amazing book. And listen, people should just hire you.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Well, Dana Wasson, thank you for being with us. This was tremendously valuable. We have to have you back.
Thank you, David. Thank you for including me.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.